Chapter 5. The Countess of Monte Cristo. For a few days after the bundle, looking like a pile of unwanted clothes, had been carried into the Eggharts' house, nothing more was heard. The Eggharts didn't speak to anyone, and of course, rumours flew round the square. The bundle was a mad woman, like Mrs. Rochester in Jane Eyre, who laughed hideously and would set the place on fire. Or she had bubonic plague and had to be sealed up on quarantine. Then Pauline read a book called The Count of Monte Cristo, about a man who had been wrongfully imprisoned in a dungeon in a castle on an island in the middle of the sea. "That's what she's like. She's a Countess of Monte Cristo," Pauline said. "They've walled her up and she can't get out." It was Annika who found out that the Countess lived not in a dungeon, but in an attic. It exactly faced the attic where Annika slept, across the square, and on the third day she saw something carried to the chair beside the window. Then the window was opened, and the old lady was aired. Like the washing, thought Annika. Before the window was closed again, and she was carried back to bed. It was not until the beginning of the second week that Mitzi, one of the Eggharts' maids, was able to slip into Ellie's kitchen for a cup of coffee and tell them what was going on. The old lady was Herr Egghart's great aunt. She was 94 years old and sometimes wandered in her mind. And the Eggharts had done everything they could to find a hospital or an old people's home where she could be looked after. "They put her in an asylum, the one they're going to pull down behind the infirmary," said Mitzi. "But the man who ran it found she was related to the Eggharts, and he said she wasn't mad and they should take her in. She's very frail, and he said she won't live long." There was quite a fuss, but the Eggharts were afraid what people would say, so they agreed. She has a nurse in the morning and in the evening to tidy her up, but she can't get downstairs, and most of the time she just lies in bed. She'll go soon. Old people know when they aren't wanted. "Poor soul," said Ellie, stirring her coffee. "It's hard to be old." This annoyed Annika, who was sitting on her stool in the corner stringing beans. "No, it isn't. It won't be for you, because I shall buy a house in the mountains and look after you, and Sigrid too." "Mind you, she could be a handful, the old lady," Mitzi went on. "She didn't get on with her family, and when she was 15 she went her own way, and the family lost touch with her. The Eggharts had been forced to take in their great aunt. Well, that was all. They never mentioned her to visitors who came to the house. They never took her out. It was as though they were pretending to themselves that she wasn't quite there." What happened next was odd, and Annika couldn't make sense of it. Lomery stopped to speak to her, and she met her on the street. And not to sneer or to show off. She was polite, almost friendly, and though she still stuck out her behind, the black eyes, sunk so deep in her face, did not seem quite so baleful. The first time Lomery came up to her was when Annika was wheeling out the new Bodek baby in his ancient rickety pram. Usually Lomery walked past all the Bodeks with her nose in the air, but now she forced herself to look under the hood and even asked how old he was. The second time, Annika was returning from the shops with a basket of new potatoes, and this time Lomery actually crossed the street to speak to her. But it wasn't till she found Annika leaning over the rim of the fountain, crumbling bread into the water for the goldfish, that the reason for Lomery's friendliness became clear. She wanted something from Annika, and it was the last thing that Annika expected. "You know, you're poor," she began, "aren't you?" Annika shrugged. She was worried about the goldfish. One of them had fungus on his fins. And though it would have been nice to hit Lommery, there was always a fuss at home when she hit people. "So, would you like to earn some money?" Lommery went on, looking back at the windows of her house to make sure her mother wasn't watching. Annika crumbled the last of the bread into the water. "How much money?" "Quite a lot. 20 kreuzers, each time you go." "Each time I go where?" Lommery looked around again, furtively. "Go and read to my great-aunt. Sit with her. I'm supposed to do it for half an hour every afternoon. The doctor told my mother she was lonely, the old woman. But I can't. I tried it once and it was awful. She dribbles and her head wobbles, and suddenly she goes to sleep and her mouth falls open." Lommery shuddered. "It made me feel sick." "Yes, but how could I do it instead of you? Your mother would know." "No, she wouldn't. I go up between tea and supper when she rests. Anyway, even if she did find out, she probably wouldn't mind as long as it keeps the old woman quiet. The doctor is horrid to us. He says we'll be old one day and we should be kind to her. But we won't. Not like that. Poor and mad and dribbly." Annika was thinking, wringing the water from the ends of her hair. "I can't come till next week when school breaks up, and even then I have jobs to do. Well, I'll come when I can. Only you must give me 25 kreuzers. 20 isn't enough." If she could stick it out a few times, she'd have enough money to buy a proper birthday present for Ellie. "All right. I'll leave the money on the windowsill, in the scullery, in an envelope. You'll come in by the back door, of course, being a kitchen child, so you'll see it." Annika nodded. It was odd how people thought she wanted to come in by the front door, instead of straight into the nice, warm, friendly kitchen, whatever house she visited. School had finished. Exams were over, and so was the tidying up, which was almost worse. Pauline had come top in everything except gymnastics, in which she got a very low mark indeed. And this set her worrying about a man called Ferdinand Hayter, who had become world wrestling champion of Lower Austria, even though he'd been born with his left foot the wrong way round. "I don't know why I can't be like him," she said. Annika was still very busy. Ellie had decided she was old enough to make a proper apple strudel entirely by herself. Making an apple strudel on your own is a bit like climbing Everest without oxygen. Only one very special type of flour will do. The dough has to be teased out, paper thin, and laid over a tablecloth, and the apple slices and melted butter, and nuts and spices have to be poured on without making a single hole, before it is rolled into a dachshund shape and baked. Annika managed it, but it was a mixed blessing, because Ellie then said it was time she started working with aspic. "Quail's eggs in aspic, now there's a dish," she said. In the holidays, too, Professor Emile liked to take Annika behind the scenes in the art museum, to the restoration room, where men in baize aprons were at work cleaning old paintings. "Look at that," he would say, as the halo of some tortured saint turned from grubby brown to a shining gold under the restorer's hands. "Isn't that splendid? And that idiot Hartison actually thinks pictures shouldn't be cleaned. The darker and dirtier they are, the better he is pleased." But on Saturday, the children still escaped to their deserted garden, Stefan's older brother Ernst came too, and they acted the whole of the Count of Monte Cristo, within the hut as a dungeon on the island, and the steps of the ruined house as the palace of the villain who had plotted the Count's downfall. In the story, the Count escaped, and vengeance was done. But in the Egghart's attic, the other prisoner still lay unvisited and alone. The first time Annika went to sit with the Egghart's great-aunt, Lomery was waiting to show her the way. As she tiptoed after her up the stairs, Annika's feet sank deep into the patterned carpet. Chinese vases stood on pedestals. There was a smell of hothouse lilies. After the third flight of stairs, they came to a landing with a wooden partition and a door. This led to a last flight of stairs, but these were very different, narrow, bare, and airless. And instead of the scent of lilies, it was the smell of disinfectant that drifted towards them. Here were the 2 attics where the servants slept, and a third one, which now housed the unwanted old lady. Lomery turned the handle, pushed Annika into the room, and closed the door again. The room looked like a lumber room. The trunk and the 2 wooden boxes that had come in the ambulance were stacked in the corner. Nothing seemed to have been unpacked. In the middle of the floor was a narrow bed with a chair beside it. On a bedside table there was a jug of water, a glass, and a pile of books. No flowers, no fruit, nothing that was usual in the bedroom of the sick. The Egghart's great-aunt was snoring, small, snuffling snores, like the snores of a pug dog, and her mouth hung open, just as Lomery had said. Annika walked to the window. It was strange seeing her own house and her attic from the other side of the square. Behind her, the snoring had stopped. She turned. The old lady was so small and wizened that she scarcely made a hump in the bedclothes. Her white hair was so sparse you could see the scalp through it. She might have been dead already. But not when she opened her eyes. They were very blue, and her gaze was steady. "You are not Lomery," she said. Annika came over to the bed. "No." The old lady gave a grunt of satisfaction. "Well, that's a good thing anyway." Annika smiled. She knew she shouldn't, but she did. "Would you like me to read to you?" The great-aunt sighed. "No, not really. Not from those dreadful books." Annika picked up the top book on the pile. It was the colour of bile, and the title was Meditations of a Working Bishop. The one below that was called The Evening of Life by One Who Has Suffered. "They're not exactly cheerful books, are they?" said Annika. No, indeed. But then the Eggharts are not exactly a cheerful family. That's why. Why?" She was stopped by a fit of coughing. "Would you like some water?" "Yes. You'll have to help me sit up." She was so light and bony and frail. It was like propping up a bird. "So, who are you, if you're not Lomery?" she said when she could speak again. "I'm Annika. I live across the square, and I'm a foundling." "Ah, that explains it." "What does it explain?" The old lady lay back on her pillows. "Foundlings make their own lives." For a while she was silent, and Annika was wondering if she should go. And she said, "We could tell stories instead of reading them." "Yes, I'd like that," said Annika. "I know a lot of stories, because my friend Pauline works in a bookshop, and we act them." "Ah, acting? You like that?" "Yes, very much. I don't know if it's proper acting, though. We only do it for ourselves." Of course. Annika waited, sitting on the chair with folded hands. "Will you start?" she said. "All right then. Once upon a time, there was a girl who lived in a very pompous, silly family, in a very pompous, silly town. Her mother and father were stuffy, and her brothers and sisters were stuffy. They used to take 2 hours to finish their breakfast, and then it was time to start laying the table again for lunch. Salt cellars, pepper mills, mustard pots, and on and on and on." Annika nodded. She knew about meals that went on and on. The girl wanted to see the world, and she wanted to dance and act and sing properly in a theatre. But no one in her family danced or sang. Dear me, no. Dancing was not respectable. So they looked about for a husband for her, and they found an alderman with a big stomach and a watch chain across it. And when the girl saw him, she decided to run away. "Properly?" breathed Annika. "With a ladder and knotted sheets?" The old lady nodded. "More or less. She escaped at night, and with a little bit of money saved, she went to Paris. You know about Paris? So free, so beautiful. She found someone who ran a theatre, and she begged him for work, any work, so she could learn and watch. But he only laughed at her. He said he had 100 girls who wanted to dance and sing for every place he had. So the girl became very poor and very hungry. She scrubbed floors and worked as a waitress. She didn't give up. Then, one day, she found a theatre manager who said she could stand at the back of the stage and pretend to milk a cow. It was a musical comedy set on a farm. So, for many months, she milked cows and sang songs about springtime. But all the time, she watched and practiced and learned. And then, one day, something happened. A new designer came, and he had made a swing that rose up very, very high above the stage and swayed back and forwards. And on the swing was a great basket of flowers, and they wanted a girl to go up on the swing and strew the flowers. Annika thought she knew what came next. And everybody was frightened except this girl? That's right. Mind you, they were right to be frightened. It was a dangerous contraption. But the girl said she would do it. She was not afraid of heights. She liked the idea of strewing flowers, even paper flowers. She liked it very much. So they combed out her hair. She had lots of hair, pretty hair like yours. And they hauled her up and up and up. And she strewed and smiled, and everyone clapped and cheered. And that was the beginning. The old lady's voice died away. But Annika wanted to be sure. She put her hand over the wrinkled one lying on the counterpane. It was you, wasn't it? The girl on the swing was you. The lids fluttered. The blue eyes opened. She smiled. Yes, she said. It was me. When Annika got back, she found Pauline hunched in the wicker chair in the corner of the kitchen. She was eating a cheese straw, which Ellie had given her before she went to the shops, and she looked angry and most unusually clean. Pauline's hair had been washed and stood up in a frizzy mass round her head. Her fringe had been ruthlessly cut, and she wore a starched dress with a glaringly white collar. "Your mother's come?" asked Annika. "Yes, for a whole week.
She's scrubbing her way around the shop at the moment. Grandfather's gone to bed with a book about the Galapagos Islands, but it won't help him. She's going to turn out the bedrooms next. Really, Annika, I don't know why you're so interested in mothers. Pauline's mother wasn't just a nurse. She was a very high-ranking one. And the way Pauline and her grandfather lived filled her with despair. Whenever she had a holiday from the hospital, she came from Berlin and washed and scoured and scrubbed and polished, or they tried to keep out of her way and became cleaner and gloomier by the minute. Trouble is, by the time she goes, I've sort of gotten used to her. And I almost miss her. You really can't win with mothers. But of course her mother wouldn't be like that at all, thought Annika. She'd step out of her carriage in her lovely clothes, smelling of French perfume, and hold out her arms. Scrubbing and cleaning wouldn't come into it. The next time Annika went to visit the Eggharts' great aunt, Lomery let her go up alone. There seemed to be no one about, and she was glad of it, because she had brought a sprig of jasmine from the bush growing against the courtyard wall. And Ellie baked some honey cakes, but we didn't know if. The old lady shook her head. I don't get hungry. But the jasmine, she put it to her nose. I can still smell it, just. She was drowsy today, but had not forgotten that it was Annika's turn to tell a story. But not Gunga Din or Stanley and Livingstone. Your story, how you were found. So Annika told her about the church in the mountains, and about Ellie and Sigrid, who'd taken her in and brought her up. Ellie is soft and comfortable, like a mother. Sigrid is strong and busy like an aunt. And the professors are good to me. But sometimes I dream about my real mother coming. Often I dream it, that she's looked and looked for me, and at last she's found me. Do you think it's wrong to keep dreaming like that? How could it be wrong? Well, when Ellie and Sigrid look after me so well. Dreams don't work like that, Annika. She was still holding the spray of jasmine to her face. Her eyes were shut. But Annika didn't go away. She wanted the rest of the story. Last time you said it was the beginning, she said. Being on the swing. Yes, I was a success. People called me La Rondin. It means swallow in Italian. And they put me onto clouds, and in hot air balloons and gondolas, but always high, high over the stage. And always I strewed something. Flowers mostly, but sometimes autumn leaves, or golden coins, or gingerbread hearts. And once, in Russia, I strewed snow. Snow? But how? Well, of course, it was tissue paper snow. But it looked wonderful. We were touring Moscow and St. Petersburg, and I was the spirit of winter. The Russians stamped and shouted and cheered. They love it when it begins to snow. It makes the streets so quiet. The horses' hooves are muffled, and there are sledges everywhere. A count who lived in a wooden palace in the middle of a forest gave a great banquet for us. He was mad, but so generous. He gave me an emerald pendant, which had belonged to his grandmother. The Star of Kazan, it was called. Were there wolves? We didn't see any, but we heard them. And when we arrived, it was dusk, and there was a whole line of the Count's servants with lighted flares to lead us up the drive and welcome us. Her eyes were closed. She began to snore, but her mouth went slack. But it didn't matter anymore. Annika was looking at a friend. Then she woke suddenly as she had slept. The world was so beautiful in those days, Annika. The music, the flowers, the scent of the pines. It still is, said Annika. Honestly, it still is.